The biting autumn wind swept across the solemn courtyard as hundreds of state troopers stood in unbreakable, silent ranks honoring their fallen comrade. A solitary bugle played taps, the haunting melody echoing off the distant, snow-capped Rocky Mountains beneath a heavy ceiling of dark gray clouds.
Friends,
Officer
colleagues,
Jack Donovan stepped heavily toward the wooden
we are here
podium,
today to pay
his
our
Class A
respects
dress
to those we have
uniform immaculate,
lost.
his chest adorned
They will
with
not be
medals,
forgotten.
his eyes shattered. He rested a trembling, white-gloved hand on the American flag draping the small casket, surrounded by a massive floral wreath, shaped like a paw. Jack cleared his throat, his voice cracking through the hushed silence as he whispered, "Years ago, no one believed in us. Not even myself." The memory shifted violently back 5 years to a cramped, chaotic Pine Ridge animal shelter, where flickering fluorescent lights illuminated rows of damp, concrete cages. Jack was 29, his police career stalling after multiple failed Canine Academy attempts, carrying the crushing weight of impending fatherhood and financial ruin. Inside a dark corner cage sat Jax, a skinny, hyperactive border collie and German shepherd mix, his striking tuxedo coat matted and dirty. Jax paced relentlessly, his bright, mischievous dark brown eyes scanning the harsh environment, labeled unadoptable and scheduled for euthanasia by the end of the week. Shelter manager Clara Hayes stood outside his cage in her worn canvas apron, her compassionate eyes filled with profound sorrow for the doomed, chaotic dog. She had tried desperately to find him a home, but his boundless, untamed energy resulted in him being repeatedly returned by frustrated, overwhelmed families. A retired Canine veteran named Harrison had seen the raw potential beneath the madness, urging Jack to visit the shelter and find his unlikely partner. Jack walked down the noisy corridor in his sturdy flannel shirt and denim jeans, his face etched with anxiety as he searched the metal enclosures. He stopped before the final cage, staring through the chain-link fence at the black and white mutt who suddenly froze, locking eyes with the desperate trooper. There was an instant, unspoken recognition between the failing officer and the condemned dog, two discarded souls silently acknowledging their shared, profound brokenness. Clara watched cautiously as Jack knelt on the cold concrete floor, extending a hesitant hand toward the wire mesh to gauge the animal's unpredictable reaction. Jax did not bark or bare his teeth. Instead, he pressed his wet nose against Jack's calloused fingers, emitting a soft, heart-wrenching whimper of hope. In that fleeting, quiet moment, amid the deafening shelter noise, Jack made a reckless decision that would permanently alter the trajectory of both their lives. He signed the adoption papers with a shaking hand, officially claiming responsibility for the wildest, most undisciplined dog Pine Ridge had ever seen. As Jack led the newly collared dog out into the blinding Colorado sunlight, neither knew the legendary, tragic path that lay ahead of them. The transition from the sterile, concrete isolation of the shelter to Jack's cozy wooden cabin was a psychological shock to the untamed animals system. Jax viewed the quiet domestic environment not as a sanctuary, but as a tactical playground ripe for absolute, unrestrained, and catastrophic destruction. Jack returned home after a grueling 12-hour patrol shift to find his living room transformed into a chaotic battlefield of shredded fabric and wood. White stuffing from ripped pillows drifted through the warm, yellow cabin air like winter snow, settling on the deeply clawed, ruined hardwood floors. In the center of the devastation sat Jax, happily chewing the thick rubber sole off Jack's standard-issue State Patrol steel-toed duty boot. Sarah Donovan stood in the doorway, her hands resting protectively on her growing baby bump, her gentle eyes reflecting both exhaustion and deep apprehension. Jack dropped his heavy tactical gear to the floor, the metallic clatter echoing sharply as a wave of profound inadequacy washed over his tired face. He knelt beside the wreckage, realizing that applying standard police discipline to a traumatized rescue dog was a fundamentally flawed psychological approach. For weeks, every command issued in Jack's authoritative trooper voice was met with Jax's hyperactive defiance, a complete breakdown in operant conditioning. The turning point arrived not through rigorous tactical manuals, but through an accidental discovery involving cheap, processed meat during a frustrating backyard training session. Jack, wearing his faded plaid flannel, had absent-mindedly pulled a sliced hot dog from his pocket, intended as a quick snack during the exhausting drills. Instantly, Jax's frantic pacing ceased, his chaotic brown eyes locked onto the target with the hyper-focused intensity of a trained sniper acquiring a mark. The dog's chaotic energy suddenly condensed into razor-sharp obedience, his body turning rigid, waiting for the exact microscopic signal to execute a command. Jack whispered a simple sit, and Jax's hind legs hit the dirt instantly, his posture perfect, his undivided attention permanently anchored to his handler. It was a breakthrough in behavioral science for the duo. Jack had finally discovered the unique psychological currency required to bypass Jax's deeply ingrained trauma. Armed with a pouch full of cheap hot dogs, Jack transformed his backyard into a rigorous, makeshift tactical obstacle course of wood and tires. Late into the night, under the cold glow of a single floodlight, they ran behavioral drills, building the foundational muscle memory required for police work. Sarah watched from the warm cabin window, her thick-knit sweater wrapped tight against the chill, finally seeing the erratic mutt evolving into a partner. The real crucible, however, awaited them at the official Colorado State Patrol Canine Academy, a punishing environment designed to break the weak. Tomorrow, they would have to prove themselves to Captain Thorne, a hardened veteran who viewed shelter mutts as dangerous liabilities in the field. Passing the Canine Academy trials was not merely a test of physical endurance. It was a brutal psychological vetting process designed to expose handler weakness. Captain Thorne demanded absolute operational perfection, enforcing a doctrine where a single hesitation or misread sent cue could compromise a high-stakes criminal investigation. Against all statistical probabilities, the hyperactive shelter reject, and the officer on the verge of termination graduated at the very top of their tactical class. However, simulated academy environments with hidden toys and hot dory dogs could never fully replicate the grim, unpredictable reality of a live homicide scene. Their first major deployment arrived at midnight, a call for scent tracking assistance at an abandoned, decaying industrial plant suspected to be a cartel dumping ground. The atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. The damp air smelled heavily of industrial rust, stale water, and the faint, unmistakable metallic tang of human blood. Jack stepped out of his cruiser, the red and blue emergency lights violently washing over the cracked concrete walls of the dilapidated factory complex. Detective Cole, a cynical homicide investigator with zero patience for rookie canine handlers, stood holding a harsh tactical flashlight, demanding immediate, concrete results. Jax was deployed, his nose pressed firmly against the cold, dirty floor, analyzing millions of microscopic scent particles invisible to the human eye. The dog's breathing became a rapid, rhythmic vacuum, pulling in the ambient air, processing the volatile organic compounds associated with human decomposition. Suddenly, Jax bolted toward a dark corner of the facility, stopping abruptly over a large, freshly poured patch of grey cement that looked completely undisturbed. He began to scratch aggressively at the hard surface, emitting a series of sharp, distressed barks, the universal K9 signal for a positive cadaver indication. Detective Cole shined his flashlight on the smooth cement, scoffing loudly, pointing out that there were no visible seams, cracks, or signs of a burial. Jack froze, the crippling weight of imposter syndrome crashing over him as he stared at the cement, suddenly doubting his dog's highly trained instincts. Intimidated by the senior detective and fearing he would look foolish, Jack yanked hard on Jax's leash, reporting nervously that the dog must be mistaken. Jax resisted the pull, whining desperately and planting his paws firmly on the cement, confused by his handler's direct contradiction of a clear forensic reality. Jack forced the dog away, dragging a deeply distressed Jax back toward the cruiser, leaving the murder scene under the mocking gaze of Detective Cole. The failure fractured their fragile psychological bond. Jack sensed Jack's lack of faith not through words, but through the tightening leash and elevated cortisol scent. That night, while Jack sat in his cruiser filling out a humiliating incident report, a deeply confused and rejected Jack slipped out of a cracked window. The dog vanished into the freezing, torrential downpour, running blindly into the urban sprawl, seeking shelter from both the weather and his handler's profound betrayal. Jack knelt in the freezing mud beneath the rustling overpass, his state trooper uniform soaked entirely through by the relentless, driving rain. Jax pressed his trembling, soaked body against the cold concrete pillar, his dark brown eyes filled with profound confusion and deep-seated betrayal. The officer slowly lowered his tactical flashlight, casting a dim, yellowish glow that illuminated the dog's matted black and white tuxedo coat. Jack did not issue a stern command or yank a heavy nylon leash. Instead, he simply bowed his head in absolute, crushing shame. "I'm sorry, buddy," Jack whispered into the freezing wind, his voice cracking with the heavy realization that he had failed his only true partner. He extended a bare, shivering hand toward the terrified shelter mutt, allowing Jax to make the final choice regarding their fractured psychological bond. For several agonizing seconds, the only sound was the deafening roar of water cascading off the highway above and splashing violently into the mud. Slowly, Jax crept forward from the deep shadows, his wet black nose gently touching Jack's calloused palm, just as he had in the shelter. Jack immediately pulled the freezing dog into a tight, desperate embrace, burying his tear-streaked face into Jax's cold, soaking wet neck fur. In that miserable, freezing darkness, the broken officer and the rejected mutt finally forged an unbreakable, profound trust that transcended mere tactical training. Jack carried the exhausted K9 back to the warm cabin, where a deeply worried Sarah had been pacing the hardwood floors for hours. She quickly grabbed thick cotton towels, kneeling beside the fireplace, to vigorously dry Jax's shivering body, while Jack silently stoked the dying embers. That night, for the very first time, the hyperactive, destructive mutt slept soundly and peacefully at the foot of Jack and Sarah's bed. The following morning, a harsh ringing phone shattered the quiet cabin peace. Captain Thorne demanded Jack's immediate presence back at the industrial plant. Jack's stomach dropped as he strapped on his heavy-duty belt, fully expecting to be officially stripped of his K9 handler status today. He drove the cruiser back to the abandoned warehouse complex, the morning sunlight revealing the true, decaying scale of the massive industrial ruins. The scene was swarming with heavy forensic machinery, and Detective Cole stood near the previously smooth cement patch, looking furious and completely humiliated. Jack approached cautiously with Jax by his side, the dog walking with a renewed, confident swagger, his nose twitching at the familiar scent. A heavy pneumatic jackhammer shattered the grey concrete floor, sending a thick cloud of silica dust billowing into the damp, stagnant factory air. Beneath exactly 8 inches of freshly poured cement, the forensic extraction team uncovered the grim, hidden reality that Jax had smelled hours earlier. Captain Thorne stepped out from the swirling dust cloud, his crisp uniform untouched, staring down into the shallow, horrific concrete grave. He turned slowly toward Jack and the black and white mutt, his intensely scrutinizing eyes finally reflecting a profound, unspoken layer of professional respect. Detective Cole aggressively threw his notepad into the dirt, cursing loudly as he realized a shelter dog had completely outsmarted his veteran investigative instincts. "Your animal was right, Donovan," Thorne stated with a low, commanding rumble. He hit perfectly on the scent of the cartel's missing victim. Jack stood paralyzed by the revelation, the heavy weight of his previous doubts crushing his chest as he looked down at his loyal partner. Jax simply sat perfectly still beside Jack's leg, his dark brown eyes highly focused, entirely unbothered by the chaotic forensic extraction happening nearby. Thorne stepped closer, placing a heavy, authoritative hand on Jack's shoulder, a rare gesture of validation from the incredibly strict canine commander. "Never doubt the dog again, officer. We humans lie, we rationalize, and we miss things, but the canine knows is an absolute biological truth." That pivotal moment completely rewired Jack's psychological approach. He vowed to trust Jax's instincts over the cynical opinions of any human detective. News of the phenomenal canine discovery spread rapidly through the Colorado State Patrol, instantly transforming the chaotic shelter reject into a precinct legend. Over the next 3 years, the inseparable duo became the most requested, highly effective tracking unit within the entire mountainous state jurisdiction. They successfully apprehended dozens of armed fugitives hidden in dense forests, relying on a silent, instinctual communication that bordered on telepathy. Meanwhile, Jack's personal life blossomed. Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl, and Jax fiercely guarded the nursery with unyielding loyalty. The dog who once destroyed their living room now gently rested his chin on the crib, watching the sleeping infant with a gentle protectiveness. Their unparalleled success inevitably led them to the most terrifying, highest stakes mission of their entire distinguished law enforcement career. It was late December, and a sudden, catastrophic blizzard had violently descended upon the towering, unforgiving peaks of the Rocky Mountains. Emergency radios crackled with frantic, terrifying news. A 7-year-old boy named Leo had wandered away from a remote alpine cabin during the whiteout. The local search and rescue teams were already severely exhausted, completely blinded by the heavy snowfall and the aggressively dropping, sub-zero temperatures. Captain Thorne personally dispatched Jack and Jax into the treacherous, freezing wilderness, knowing they were the only unit capable of surviving the storm. As Jack secured the heavy winter tactical vest onto Jax's back, The dog let out a sharp, focused bark, fully prepared for the deadly mountain. The black tree line of the Rocky Mountains swallowed them whole as they stepped away from the flashing red and blue lights of the command center. Violent, sub-zero winds shrieked through the ancient pine trees, throwing microscopic shards of ice directly into Jack's freezing, increasingly numb face. The catastrophic blizzard effectively neutralized Jack's human senses, plunging his entire world into a chaotic, terrifying void of swirling, blinding white snow. He relied entirely on the rhythmic, blinking red LED light securely attached to Jax's heavy winter tactical vest to guide him through the darkness. Jax plunged his snout deep into the fresh, powdery snow drifts, aggressively inhaling the freezing air to isolate the microscopic scent of a terrified child. The dog's powerful chest plowed through drifts that reached Jack's waist, his muscular frame burning tremendous amounts of calories just to maintain forward momentum. Hours dragged on in the freezing darkness, and the agonizing physical toll began to systematically shut down Jack's rapidly failing, exhausted human body. His heavy winter boots felt like solid blocks of concrete, every single agonizing step requiring a monumental exertion of sheer, desperate willpower. The freezing temperature mercilessly attacked Jack's lungs, transforming every desperate breath into a sharp, stabbing pain radiating deep within his chest cavity. He stumbled heavily over a hidden, ice-covered tree root, collapsing face first into the freezing snow with a sharp, involuntary groan of absolute agony. Lying in the dark, suffocating snowbank, Jack's exhausted mind drifted dangerously toward the warm, seductive comfort of simply closing his heavy, frozen eyelids. The insidious onset of severe hypothermia began to cloud his tactical judgment, whispering sweet, lethal lies that resting for just 1 minute would be fine. Suddenly, a rough, wet black nose aggressively nudged Jack's freezing cheek, jolting his failing consciousness violently back to the grim, freezing reality. Jack stood over his fallen handler, barking furiously into the howling wind, absolutely refusing to let his human partner succumb to the deadly mountain. The dog gripped the thick fabric of Jack's heavy winter coat with his teeth, pulling backward with astonishing, desperate strength to force him upright. Staring into Jack's intensely focused, dark brown eyes, Jack found a hidden reservoir of adrenaline, remembering the terrified 7-year-old boy freezing somewhere ahead. Using the dog's sturdy, muscular frame for crucial leverage, Jack pushed himself up from the snow, his frozen joints screaming in agonizing, sharp protest. "Lead the way, buddy," moving. Jack rasped through cracked, bleeding lips, gripping the heavy tactical leash with severely frostbitten, entirely numb fingers. Jax immediately snapped back into his tracking rhythm, his tail dropping low, to conserve heat as he navigated the treacherous, increasingly steep alpine incline. They pushed higher into the deadly death zone of the mountain, where the air grew dangerously thin and the blizzard intensified its merciless assault. The treacherous terrain suddenly gave way to a massive, jagged limestone ridge, completely exposed to the catastrophic, hurricane-force winds screaming off the summit. Jack's powerful headlamp beam could barely penetrate 3 feet into the swirling white abyss, making every single step a potentially fatal, blind gamble. Suddenly, Jax's body language changed dramatically, his ears pinned flat against his head, and he began pulling the heavy leash with frantic, unyielding desperation. The dog had caught a concentrated pocket of scent trapped beneath the heavy snow, signifying they were incredibly close to the missing child. Jack scrambled aggressively up a steep, icy embankment, his sharp claws desperately seeking traction on the frozen, unforgiving rocks hidden beneath the drifts. Jack slipped violently, sliding backward down the ice, but maintained a death grip on the heavy nylon leash, refusing to lose his only guide. Reaching the summit of the ridge, Jack suddenly stopped dead in his tracks, his entire muscular body tensing as he stared into the dark void. They stood on the absolute edge of a terrifying, sheer cliff drop, the roaring wind threatening to throw them both into the black abyss below. Jack stepped dangerously close to the crumbling icy edge, looking straight down into the freezing darkness and unleashing a series of deafening, frantic barks. Jack crawled forward on his stomach to avoid being blown off the mountain, shining his tactical headlamp straight down into the terrifying, swirling, snowy void. About 15 feet down the sheer rock face, resting precariously on a narrow, snow-covered limestone ledge, was a tiny, motionless lump of dark fabric. The bright beam illuminated a reflective stripe on a thick dark blue puffer jacket and a bright orange beanie half buried in the freezing snow. It was little Leo Hayes, severely hypothermic and completely unresponsive, teetering dangerously on the edge of a fatal, 100-foot plunge into the rocky valley. Panic surged through Jack's exhausted veins as he realized he had absolutely no specialized climbing ropes or rescue harnesses to reach the dying boy. He quickly unclipped the heavy tactical leash from Jax's winter vest, wrapping the thick nylon tightly around his own severely frostbitten, numb hand. Jack ordered his partner to stay back as he carefully slid his heavy winter boots over the icy edge of the terrifying, dark precipice. Dangling over the black abyss, Jack used his remaining, rapidly fading strength to lower himself blindly toward the narrow, crumbling ledge holding the child. His steel-toe boot finally struck the solid rock of the ledge, sending a cascade of loose ice and snow tumbling down into the unseen valley. Jack grabbed the freezing, unconscious boy by his thick puffer jacket, pulling the small, fragile body tightly against his own exhausted, shivering chest. Looking up at the sheer ice wall, Jack realized climbing back up with a comatose child in his arms was a physical, absolute impossibility. The freezing, hurricane-force winds violently battered Jack against the sheer ice wall as he desperately shielded the comatose boy with his own body. He looked up toward the crumbling edge, screaming over the deafening blizzard for Jax to run back to the command center and find help. But the fiercely loyal mutt absolutely refused to abandon his handler, pacing frantically along the terrifying precipice and whining into the dark abyss. Knowing little Leo would succumb to severe hypothermia within minutes, Jack devised a desperate, completely reckless tactical extraction plan. He stripped off his own heavy winter gloves, exposing his bare, frostbitten skin to the agonizing, sub-zero mountain temperatures. Jack rapidly secured the thick, heavy-duty nylon canine leash into a makeshift tactical harness, wrapping it tightly under the unconscious child's arms. He looked up at the silhouette of his partner against the swirling white snow, whistling the sharp, high-pitched command for a tactical tug-of-war. Jack violently threw the heavy brass carabiner end of the nylon leash straight up the 15-foot vertical ice wall into the blinding darkness. The heavy metal clip arched through the blizzard, landing dangerously close to the crumbling limestone edge, where Jax was frantically pacing. Without a single second of hesitation, Jax aggressively lunged forward, snapping his powerful jaws tightly around the thick, freezing nylon webbing. The dog immediately shifted his center of gravity, dropping his muscular hindquarters low into the deep snowpack to establish a massive, unyielding anchor. "Pull, Jax, pull!" Jax screamed from the tiny ledge, using his last reserve of adrenaline to heave the heavy child upward against the slick ice. Jax's sharp claws dug violently into the frozen earth, his powerful neck muscles bulging as he dragged the dead weight backward away from the precipice. The sheer physical strain on the dog was catastrophic. The heavy nylon leash cut deeply into the corners of his mouth, drawing bright red blood. But Jax absolutely refused to yield, unleashing a low, guttural growl of pure defiance against the deadly, unforgiving gravity of the Rocky Mountains. Inch by agonizing inch, the unconscious body of little Leo was dragged vertically up the sheer, terrifying ice wall by the relentless canine. Jack pushed from below until his frozen muscles completely gave out, watching helplessly as the boy was pulled out of his desperate reach. Above the ridge, Jax gave one final, violent backward heave, dragging the child's body safely over the crumbling edge and onto the flat snow. The exhausted dog immediately collapsed, panting beside the boy, his paws bleeding and his muzzle stained red, but his dark eyes burning with victory. Now, Jack was left completely alone on the collapsing, narrow limestone ledge, his physical strength entirely depleted as the storm raged on. The terrifying reality of his isolation crashed over Jack. He had successfully saved the child, but effectively sealed his own frozen tomb on the mountain. The narrow limestone ledge suddenly shuddered violently beneath Jack's heavy steel-toe boots, a massive crack echoing sharply through the freezing air. Above on the ridge, Jax realized his handler was still trapped in the abyss, his protective instincts overriding his complete, agonizing physical exhaustion. The bleeding dog crawled to the very edge of the deadly drop, pointing his snout into the violent blizzard and unleashing a relentless barrage of deafening barks. Jax's frantic, booming voice acted as a biological distress beacon, piercing through the catastrophic howling winds of the Rocky Mountain whiteout. A mile away, Captain Thorne and a heavily equipped search team suddenly paused, catching the faint, rhythmic echo of the canine's desperate call. Jack closed his heavy, frozen eyes, pressing his back against the sheer ice wall as the tiny ledge beneath his boots began to catastrophically crumble. He accepted his tragic fate, finding a strange, quiet peace in knowing that the chaotic shelter mutt had fulfilled his ultimate purpose. Suddenly, A blinding array of tactical flashlights aggressively pierced the swirling darkness above, accompanied by the frantic shouting of human voices. Captain Thorne violently threw himself onto the icy edge, reaching down into the abyss, just as the remaining limestone ledge completely gave way. Jack plummeted backward into the pitch-black void, his heart stopping, before a heavy, thick rescue rope violently snapped tight around his chest. 4 massive, adrenaline-fueled state troopers heaved backward simultaneously, brutally dragging Jack's heavy body up over the jagged, icy precipice to safety. Jack collapsed onto the deep snow, violently gasping for the freezing air as Jax immediately tackled his chest, licking his frostbitten face frantically. A frantic medic rushed over to the unconscious boy, quickly tearing open chemical heat packs and wrapping Leo in a thick, reflective thermal blanket. As the medic wiped the heavy frost from the boy's pale, freezing face, the beam of a flashlight illuminated Leo's features in the darkness. Jack, trembling violently from severe hypothermia, looked at the child and recognized the unmistakable, gentle facial features of Clara Hayes from the animal shelter. The universe had orchestrated a profound, unbelievable circle of salvation. The dog Clara had saved from euthanasia had just saved her only son from the mountain. Captain Thorne knelt beside Jack and the bleeding canine, his stern, hardened face completely breaking as a single tear froze instantly on his cheek. End of search. Thorne spoke hoarsely into his heavy police radio, his voice trembling with overwhelming emotion. The K9 unit has the boy. The perilous descent back to the base camp was a slow, agonizing blur of flashing lights, medical sirens, and the unbreakable bond of survival. The chaotic base camp at the foot of the mountain erupted into frantic activity as the battered rescue team finally emerged from the raging blizzard. Paramedics rushed forward with a heavy thermal stretcher, rapidly transferring the pale, freezing body of little Leo toward the waiting warmth of the medical tent. Clara Hayes, her face pale and exhausted from hours of terrifying uncertainty, pushed desperately through the crowd of heavily armed state troopers to reach him. She collapsed to her knees beside the stretcher, weeping uncontrollably as she pressed her trembling hands against the miraculously breathing chest of her only son. Behind her, Jack limped slowly into the glaring floodlights of the camp, heavily supported by the firm, respectful grip of Captain Marcus Thorne. Beside Jack walked Jax, his thick black coat completely caked in frozen blood and heavy ice, limping slightly but radiating an undeniable, majestic pride. Hearing the familiar click of canine claws on the icy pavement, Clara slowly turned her tear-streaked face away from her son's thermal stretcher. Her red, exhausted eyes locked onto the bruised, bleeding shelter mutt with the distinct white tuxedo patch whom she had saved from certain euthanasia years ago. A profound, shattering realization washed over the shelter manager as she fully comprehended the impossible, miraculous circle of fate standing right in front of her. Clara abandoned the stretcher, rushing toward the exhausted K9 and collapsing into the freezing slush to throw her arms desperately around his thick, muscular neck. Jax immediately recognized the kind, gentle woman who had fed him when he was a terrified, unwanted reject, letting out a soft, affectionate whine. She buried her crying face deep into his frozen, bloody fur, sobbing profound words of gratitude that were entirely drowned out by the howling wind. Jack stood shivering uncontrollably under a thick thermal blanket, watching the incredibly emotional reunion, with tears streaming silently down his frostbitten, heavily bruised face. Captain Thorne respectfully removed his snow-covered campaign hat, bowing his head slightly in a rare, silent tribute to the unparalleled bravery of the K9. The chaotic base camp suddenly fell completely silent, every single veteran officer pausing to witness the breathtaking psychological weight of the impossible mountain rescue. Medics eventually forced Jack into the back of a brightly lit ambulance, aggressively treating his severe hypothermia with warm intravenous fluids and thick thermal wraps. Jax absolutely refused to leave his handler's side, jumping aggressively into the back of the ambulance and curling up tightly against Jack's shivering legs. Even the strict, protocol-driven paramedics did not dare argue with the bleeding, fiercely protective hero dog, allowing the K9 to remain inside the sterile vehicle. As the heavy ambulance doors slammed shut, Jack weakly reached down, resting his freezing, bandaged hand gently on his loyal partner's bruised, exhausted head. The blaring sirens faded into the dark, snowy night, carrying the broken officer and the legendary mutt toward the safety of the local mountain hospital. The miraculous rescue on the freezing mountain permanently cemented K9 Jax as an absolute, untouchable legend within the entire Colorado State Patrol Department. 3 months later, a grand, highly publicized ceremony was held in the sunlit courtyard of the police headquarters to officially honor the heroic canine. Hundreds of officers stood perfectly at attention as the state governor formally pinned a prestigious Silver Medal of Valor onto Jax's heavy tactical harness. Clara and little Leo Hayes sat proudly in the front row, the young boy smiling brightly and waving excitedly at the dog who saved his life. Jack, wearing his pristine Class A dress uniform, beamed with overwhelming pride, his frostbite scars serving as a permanent testament to their shared survival. As the years inevitably passed, the chaotic, hyperactive shelter mutt slowly matured into a highly disciplined, stoic, and deeply respected veteran of the police force. Silver hairs began to quietly appear around Jax's dark snout, and his once explosive, lightning-fast sprints gradually mellowed into a calculated, incredibly efficient tactical trot. At home, he was no longer the destructive force that tore apart pillows, but a gentle, aging guardian who carefully watched over Jack's growing daughter. Sarah often found the massive dog sleeping peacefully on the colorful nursery rug, allowing the giggling toddler to safely pull at his graying, floppy ears. Despite his advancing age, Jax absolutely refused to officially retire from active duty, living entirely for the thrilling rush of the tactical police cruiser. Captain Thorne secretly instructed dispatchers to assign the aging K9 unit to lower-risk tracking missions, aiming to protect the legendary dog from unnecessary danger. But fate, completely uncaring of their careful precautions, had already orchestrated one final, devastatingly violent confrontation deep within the remote Colorado wilderness. It was a blistering, humid summer afternoon when the frantic emergency call shattered the quiet peace of the Regional Police Dispatch Command Center. A highly dangerous, heavily armed fugitive had violently ambushed a local sheriff's deputy, fleeing desperately into the dense, untamed thicket of the Blackwood Forest. Jack immediately activated his blaring sirens, his heart pounding aggressively against his ribs as he sped the heavy cruiser toward the chaotic, escalating tactical situation. In the back seat, Jax let out a low, deeply serious growl, sensing the acute, terrifying spike in his handler's physiological stress levels. The aging dog stood rigidly behind the metal partition, his dark brown eyes locking onto the rapidly approaching, incredibly dense wall of green trees. Jack forcefully slammed the cruiser into park at the chaotic staging area, completely surrounded by heavily armed SWAT teams and terrified local police officers. Captain Thorne approached Jack's vehicle with a grim, intensely serious expression, handing the handler a detailed, terrifying tactical map of the treacherous forest terrain. He is heavily armed and extremely desperate, Donovan, Thorne warned darkly, completely unaware that this would be the tragic end of their legendary partnership. Jack unclipped Jax from the heavy cruiser, the blistering summer heat of the Blackwood Forest instantly suffocating them both in a thick, oppressive blanket of humidity. The dense, untamed thicket was a tactical nightmare, completely obstructing their line of sight and masking the deadly fugitive scent with rotting vegetation and damp earth. Sweat poured rapidly down Jack's face as he drew his standard-issue service weapon, gripping the heavy tactical leash tightly with his trembling left hand. Jax dropped his graying snout to the humid soil, completely ignoring the chaotic swarm of heavily armed SWAT officers spreading out behind them in the thicket. The veteran K9 immediately locked onto the distinct, adrenaline-laced scent of the terrified shooter, his entire muscular body tensing with absolute, hyper-focused predatory intent. They moved silently through the suffocating green shadows, stepping carefully over rotting, moss-covered logs to avoid snapping dry twigs that would instantly betray their tactical position. The deafening chorus of cicadas echoed aggressively through the towering pine canopy, completely drowning out the subtle, dangerous sounds of the desperate fugitive moving ahead. Suddenly, Jax froze mid-step, his ears twitching wildly as he raised his dark nose into the stagnant air, catching a concentrated, fresh pocket of human sweat. He pulled the heavy nylon leash taut, guiding Jax silently toward a massive, impenetrable wall of dark green thorny brambles, bordering a steep, treacherous ravine. Jack wiped the blinding sweat from his eyes, signaling the trailing tactical team to hold their positions as he and Jax slowly advanced into the fatal choke point. The air grew terrifyingly still, even the deafening cicadas suddenly silenced, creating an eerie, suffocating void of anticipation within the dense, dark woodland shadows. A subtle, metallic click of a rifle safety being disengaged echoed sharply from the thick brush, instantly triggering Jack's deeply ingrained law enforcement survival instinct. "Drop the weapon. State patrol." Jack screamed aggressively into the dense green thicket, leveling his drawn service pistol directly toward the source of the terrifying sound. The fugitive, trapped against the steep ravine and consumed by absolute panic, blindly raised an illegal, fully automatic assault rifle from his concealed position in the brambles. Before the shooter could fully depress the heavy metal trigger, Jax violently lunged forward, snapping the heavy nylon leash directly out of Jack's sweaty, trembling grip. The incredibly brave dog launched his heavy, muscular body through the air, completely exposing himself to the deadly line of fire to protect his beloved handler. A deafening, catastrophic burst of automatic gunfire violently shattered the profound silence of the forest, muzzle flashes illuminating the dark green canopy with terrifying, strobe-like intensity. The world slowed to a terrifying, agonizing crawl as Jack watched his fiercely loyal partner intercept the deadly barrage of supersonic bullets meant entirely for him. Jax crashed heavily into the shooter's chest, his powerful jaws locking aggressively onto the man's firing arm, even as the fatal, burning lead pierced his own torso. The violent impact threw the screaming fugitive backward into the dirt, effectively neutralizing the immediate, catastrophic threat to Jack and the surrounding SWAT officers. Jack roared in absolute, primal fury, charging forward to violently kick the jammed assault rifle away from the bleeding suspect writhing in the humid forest dirt. SWAT operators swarmed the immediate area, aggressively pinning the screaming fugitive to the ground, but Jack completely ignored the chaotic, unfolding tactical arrest procedure. He dropped heavily to his knees in the damp soil, desperately reaching out toward the motionless, bleeding body of his legendary K9 partner lying in the ferns. The golden hour sunlight pierced through the thick forest canopy, casting a tragic, fiery orange glow over Jax's severely wounded, rapidly failing muscular frame. Blood stained the distinctive white tuxedo patch on the dog's chest, soaking rapidly into the humid earth as his heavy, labored breathing grew increasingly shallow and erratic. Jack violently ripped off his heavy tactical vest, desperately pressing his bare, trembling hands against the catastrophic gunshot wounds in a futile attempt to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me, buddy. Stay with me," Jack screamed frantically, tears streaming uncontrollably down his dirt-streaked face as absolute panic consumed his entire being. Jax let out a soft, heartbreaking whimper, struggling weakly to lift his graying head to look directly into the terrified, weeping eyes of his devastated handler. Even in his final, agonizing moments, the loyal dog's only concern was the safety of his partner, gently licking Jack's trembling, blood-stained fingers with profound affection. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the chaotic forest clearing as the hardened SWAT operators respectfully removed their tactical helmets, witnessing the heartbreaking tragedy unfold. Captain Thorne burst through the dense brush, his stern face immediately crumbling into absolute, devastating sorrow as he saw the fatally wounded K9 lying in the dirt. He knelt silently beside the weeping officer, placing a heavy, trembling hand on Jack's shaking shoulder, offering a profound, wordless gesture of shared, immense grief. Jack pulled Jax's heavy, bleeding head gently into his lap, burying his crying face deep into the soft, graying fur behind the dog's fading, twitching ears. The vibrant, fiery orange sunlight slowly shifted into a somber, bruised purple twilight, perfectly mirroring the tragic, inevitable fading of the dog's incredibly vibrant life force. Jax's dark brown eyes, once filled with chaotic, untamed energy and boundless joy, slowly began to cloud over, losing their brilliant, highly focused tactical spark. He let out one final, incredibly soft, and completely peaceful sigh, his heavy, muscular body relaxing entirely as he slipped away into the quiet, darkening forest shadows. Jack unleashed a devastating, primal scream of absolute agony into the towering pine trees, clutching the lifeless body of his only true partner tightly to his chest. The chaotic shelter mutt, who had been completely unwanted and scheduled for death, had ultimately given everything he had to save the life of his best friend. Paramedics eventually approached with quiet, absolute reverence, carefully placing a pristine American flag over the dog's blood-stained body as Jack refused to let him go. The legendary, unbreakable K9 unit had officially been severed. Jack carried his fallen brother out of the dark woods, forever changed by the ultimate, devastating sacrifice. The brutal, chaotic memory of the dark forest slowly faded, replaced once again by the biting autumn wind sweeping across the solemn police cemetery courtyard. Jack stood at the wooden podium, his trembling, white-gloved hands gripping the edges tightly as he looked out over the sea of dark blue uniforms. Tears streamed freely down his faintly scarred cheeks, a stark, profound contrast to the pristine, stoic perfection of his heavily medaled Class A dress uniform. He was entirely unwanted, a hyperactive shelter reject scheduled for euthanasia, a chaotic soul that nobody in this world had time to understand, Jack whispered. He paused, his voice cracking with immense, overwhelming emotion as he looked directly at the small, flag-draped casket, resting silently beside the beautiful floral wreath. But that broken mutt taught me more about absolute loyalty, unwavering courage, and completely selfless love than any tactical academy ever could have, Jack continued. In the front row, Sarah Donovan wept silently, her face buried in a tissue, remembering the gentle, aging guardian who used to watch her children sleep. Beside her sat Clara Hayes, holding the hand of her now 12-year-old son, Leo, both of them staring at the casket with profound, unbreakable gratitude. I was supposed to be his handler, his rescuer, the officer who saved him from a dark, concrete cage in a noisy animal shelter, Jack said. He wiped his wet eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath as the heavy, tragic reality of the dog's ultimate, devastating sacrifice washed completely over him. But the absolute truth is, I didn't save Jax. Jack saved me, over and over again, right up until his very last, heroic heartbeat. A heavy, collective wave of raw emotion rippled through the hundreds of tough, hardened state troopers standing perfectly at attention in the freezing courtyard. Captain Marcus Thorne stood incredibly rigid, his heavily scarred face locked in a tight, grim expression, his jaw clenching to hold back his own tears. Jack slowly stepped away from the wooden podium, his heavy, polished dress boots clicking rhythmically on the concrete as he approached his partner's final resting place. He raised his trembling right hand, executing a slow, absolutely perfect military salute toward the pristine American flag, draping the small wooden canine casket. The hundreds of officers standing in the courtyard simultaneously mirrored the profound gesture, an entire law enforcement agency honoring a legendary, four-legged hero. The deafening silence of the cemetery was suddenly pierced by the sharp, authoritative crackle of the Central Police Dispatch radio echoing from the cruiser's PA system. A female dispatcher's voice broke through the cold wind, perfectly steady but carrying the immense, crushing weight of a formal, devastating final announcement. Colorado State Patrol dispatch to Canine Unit Jax. Colorado State Patrol dispatch to Canine Unit Jax. The voice echoed mournfully across the dark, cloudy mountains. There was absolutely no response, only the haunting, tragic hiss of empty radio static filling the massive, silent void left by the fallen canine. The silence stretched into eternity, an agonizing, crushing weight pressing down on every single officer present as the grim reality of the moment finally set in. Dispatch to K9 Unit Jax, the dispatcher called a second time, her professional facade cracking slightly, revealing the profound, underlying sorrow of the entire department. Jack closed his tear-filled eyes, his saluting arm trembling violently as the radio static hissed mercilessly across the cold, wind-swept courtyard of the cemetery. Captain Thorne stepped out of the rigid formation, slowly walking toward Jack's parked cruiser with heavy, deliberate steps, his face completely devoid of its usual sternness. He reached through the open window, picking up the heavy black radio microphone with heavily scarred hands that shook with an unfamiliar, profound grief. Captain Thorne to dispatch, he spoke clearly, his deep, rumbling voice echoing across the courtyard, instantly commanding the absolute attention of everyone present. Show K9 Unit Jax out of service. End of watch, Thorne commanded, his voice breaking on the final words as he officially retired the legendary dog.
Attention
Copy,
all
Captain,
units.
the dispatcher replied, crying
Final
openly
farewell
now
for
over the
K9
open
legend.
channel. End of
His
watch for
honorable
K9
watch
Jax.
is ended.
Rest easy,
We'll
boy.
take it from
We
here,
have the watch
partner.
from here. A solemn honor guard, composed of 6 veteran K9 handlers, marched slowly toward the casket, their polished boots moving in perfect, respectful synchronization. With precise, incredibly practiced military movements, they began the profound, heartbreaking ritual of carefully lifting and folding the pristine American flag from the wooden casket. Each intricate fold of the heavy canvas represented a massive, impossible sacrifice, reducing the vibrant, beautiful colors into a tight, perfect, and immaculate triangle. The lead handler turned smartly, taking 3 measured steps before kneeling gracefully directly in front of Jack Donovan, holding the perfectly folded flag out to him. On behalf of the governor, the State
On
Patrol,
behalf of
and a grateful community,
department, we
please
present
accept this flag as
as
a symbol of our profound
our
appreciation for his
appreciation
service,
for
the
Officer
handler
Donovan.
recited. Jack lowered his salute, reaching out with both white-gloved hands to accept the heavy, folded flag, clutching it desperately and tightly against his chest. He looked past the honor guard, his gaze drifting upward toward the towering, snow-capped peaks of the Rocky Mountains looming silently in the dark distance. In the gentle rustling of the cold autumn wind, Jack swore he could hear the faint, happy panting of a chaotic shelter mutt bounding through the endless snow. He stepped forward one final time, placing a bare, trembling hand directly onto the smooth wood of the casket, leaving a profound piece of his soul behind. "I'll see you at the bridge,
Rest easy,
buddy,"
my friend.
Jack whispered softly, his voice finally
I'll
steady,
take it from
offering
here.
a quiet, eternal promise to his legendary,
promise.
unbreakable partner. The lone bugler played the final, lingering note of taps, the haunting melody drifting up into the dark grey clouds, officially closing the heartbreaking chapter. As the vast crowd slowly began to disperse, the camera panned high into the cold sky, forever immortalizing the epic, tragic tale of Canine Jack's.